Good morning. Well, taking advantage of our clinic being closed, I will be sharing my Ein Yaakov shir this morning. Now, just to preface, the first story that we're about to see is extremely shocking, horrifying, quite frankly. And the Ramchal, Rav Moshe Chaim Lutzato, for example, and the Maral, to a certain extent as well, write extensively about the story in Agada are frequently not meant to be taken literally, but they are there to symbolize other matters. So I can't tell you with certainty whether or not this story that we're about to read actually occurred, or if it's just there for some symbolic purpose. I will share with you Rav Kook's understanding of the symbolism of the story. But as I said, the story itself is kind of pretty horrifying. And just to mention again before I forget, that this shir is sponsored in memory of Chana Devora Bas Avraham. So the story is as follows. Hahi Chamisa, there was a mother-in-law, Dahava Snia La Lekalsa, who hated her daughter-in-law. Now, the Gemara had been discussing earlier about the dangers of using persimmon oil in your Shabbos candles because persimmon oil is extremely flammable. So, riffing off of that discussion, the Gemara now tells us this story of the mother-in-law who hated her daughter-in-law. Amrullah, so one day the mother-in-law told the daughter-in-law, Zil ikshit, go adorn yourself, b'mishcha da'afarsima, with persimmon oil, because it smelled very nicely. Uzla, the daughter-in-law, went, ikshit, and she adorned herself. Ki asai, when she returned to her mother-in-law, Amrullah, the mother-in-law, said, Zil itli shraga, please go ahead and light a torch for me. Itli shraga, so the unsuspecting daughter-in-law lit the torch. Infach ba nura, and the flame immediately ignited upon the daughter-in-law. Va'achlasa, and it consumed her. As I said, a pretty shocking story. Rav Kook says as follows. He says that there are often times, and he's speaking about Klal Yisrael as a whole, outsiders who make themselves appear as if they are Philo-Semites and give us all sorts of ideas of what we can do, but heeding their advice can often lead to, as he puts it, a fire consuming the Jewish camp. Oftentimes doing things, and it's clear to me that Rav Kook, especially if you know a little bit about the history of the time when he lived, was referring to the fact that many young Jewish people, including yeshiva students, were heading off to university. And he says the idea of getting an external beautification isn't bad in its own, unless it ends up leading the heart astray from purity, from the holiness of Torah and the mitzvos. And he says, beautifying yourself using the beauty of Yefes, which is a metaphor for Greek education, or again, studying in the great universities of Europe, that can often lead to a great destruction within the person. Until the people go ahead and start understanding the Torah through the lens of the secular wisdom that comes from roots that are foreign to the Torah, and it can end up consuming the entirety of Torah within the person. And therefore, he says that while it's necessary to take the appropriate amount of wisdom from these sources, but we have to be careful to utilize it through the lens of Torah. Then the Ein Yaakov continues. It's quoting a pasuk in Sefer Yirmiyah, that after the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash, when the vast majority of the Jewish nation was exiled to Bavel, to Babylonia, umidalus haaretz, and from the most impoverished in the land, Hishir Nebuchadnezzar Rav Tabachim, Nebuchadnezzar, the chief butcher, he's called the chief butcher, the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, because of the sheer number of people he killed. He left them lekormim uliyogvim. What are kormim and yogvim? Kormim Tani Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef explained that kormim are melakte afar simon me'ein gedi. They are people who picked persimmons from Ein Gedi v'ad Ramsa until the city of Ramsa. What are yogvim? Elut saide chalazon. They were people who fished or hunted for the chalazon. Mi sulmos shel Tzur, from the ladders of Tzur ad Haifa until Haifa. So the poorest people, so to speak, the lowest of the low, were left behind in Eretz Yisrael. Already for a long time, the Babylonians had created a brain drain in the land of Israel and had taken the best and the brightest to Babylonia. But after the destruction, everybody was removed, except for, let's say, the lowest strata of society. The Habona commentary on the Ein Yaakov says that Hashem wanted to make sure that Eretz Yisrael was a very comfortable place to live. And we know already from the Psukim in Chumash, Eretz Chitu, Sa'ora, Gefen, Te'ena, that all of the different grains and fruits that Eretz Yisrael was blessed with. But he explains Hashem also wanted to make sure that it wasn't just blessed with the basic necessities that we all need for everyday life, but even with persimmon, which can make a beautiful perfume, and even the chalazon, from which could be dyed the beautiful blue-green dye of the chalazon. Even luxuries were available there as well, and therefore it allowed the Jewish people to live on a higher level of society. But after the Churban, it became the opposite, that not only were they not living as the highest levels of society, but that's why Nebuchadnezzar appointed the lowest level of society on top of these things such as persimmons and the chalazons, to show how far the Jewish people had fallen, that even the luxuries were now all being downtrodden. Rabbi Tarfon Omer, Ein Madlikin Ela B'Shemen Zayis Bilvad. Rabbi Tarfon announced that you can only light Shabbos candles with olive oil. And we didn't discuss so much of it in the Ein Yaakov, but earlier there was a lot of discussion in the Gemara about the different types of fuel that could be used. And even though certain ones were prohibited, but there were plenty that were permitted. And now along came Rabbi Tarfon and he said, nope, the only type of oil you can use is olive oil. So Ahmad Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri al Raglav, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri got up on his feet, V'amar, and he said, Mayasu anshe Bavel she'en lahem ela shemen shumshemen. Well, if you're only going to permit olive oil, what are the Babylonian people going to do? They don't have olive oil. All they have is sesame oil. Uma yasu anshe madai, and what are the people of Media going to do? She'en lam ela shemen agozim, who only have nut oil. Uma yasu anshe Alexandria she'en lam ela shemen tzinonos, And what are the people of Alexandria going to do that they only have radish oil? Ma yasu anshe kaputkaya, she'en lehem lokach v'lokach ela neft. And what are the people of Cappadocia going to do? They don't have any of those oils that come from vegetables. All they have is kerosene. Ela rather, ein lecha ela ma she'amru chachamim ein madlikin. Rather, we only have the list that we have in our Mishnah, what the sages said that you cannot light with, but all other types of oil are permitted. And the Habona, the Ein Yaakov, explains, why did Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri get up on his feet? We have numerous places in the Gemara where people are disagreeing with each other. Normally it just says, Amar, this one said and that one said. Why over here did Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri stand up on his feet as if he wanted to make a very strong statement? But the reason is because he was afraid that if people would listen to Rabbi Tarfon's words, and then they wouldn't have olive oil, as he listed all these different places where olive oil was not obtainable, then they would end up doing without Shabbos candles whatsoever. They wouldn't realize that Rabbi Tarfon was stating a chumrah, a strictness, and the absence of being able to perform Rabbi Tarfon's strictness. They would go back to the basic halacha, but they might just assume that, oh, okay, if no olive oil, we don't light Shabbos candles. And therefore he stood up because he felt it was very important to make the point that even if one cannot perform a mitzvah in the absolute best and most preferred way possible, but he can perform a mitzvah maybe a less preferred way, but one that does fulfill the strictures of the mitzvah, then he surely should be doing it in the other manner. And therefore he felt it was wrong of Rabbi Tarfon to speak so strongly of saying that one can only do this mitzvah using olive oil. The Ben Yoyada says similarly that he felt that it was not right to create an injunction that would be so difficult for people to heed. It was all nice and good of Rabbi Tarfon to make this injunction living in Eretz Yisrael, where olives were very readily easy, but he had no business doing that when there are Jews living all over the world who lacked access to olive oil. Thank you very much for listening. Have a very good day.